Okay, so for our final week, we cover Vietnamese, American Amerasians, and orphans. So first, who are Amerasians? Amerasians are Vietnamese Americans, or Vietnamese if they're still in Vietnam, who have one Vietnamese parent, most likely the mother is Vietnamese, and an American father, most likely a soldier, and they got together during the Vietnam War. They are sometimes referred to as war babies or love child. And and when the U.S. forces left Vietnam, many of the Amerasians who remained were in a dire situation because they were mixed race and they physically embodied the enemy, which is America and U.S. soldiers. So if they were left there, they would most likely be persecuted, and many were. Many were unwanted even because they were mixed race with an American soldier father. So it became a major issue. And so shortly before the end of the war and after, there were attempts to save Amerasian babies and orphans. A lot of times, Amerasians were uh, left at orphanage because the parents, the Vietnamese mother, could not keep a child like that because of social persecution. And but at the same time, the orphans were also orphans from the war. A lot of kids were left orphans because their parents died from bombings or from fighting. And so the U.S. Had an attempt. It was a goodwill effort to make America look like it was a savior. The U.S. We lost this war, but we're going to rescue and save Vietnamese orphans and Amerasians. Now, what happened is many of the orphans were later discovered to be not orphans at all. They were actually kids who had parents and lived with families and missed their mom and their brothers and sisters and their dads. And it was American social workers going in to communities in Vietnam and talking Vietnamese mothers to giving up their babies, talking Vietnamese families into giving up their toddler and infant babies so that they would have, quote unquote, a better life in the United States. And it was such a traumatizing time in terms of uh, chaos and war, maybe being hungry and not having food, that some parents thought, well, for because I love my child so much, I will give him or her up, uh, and um, and that was not good for them, and that happened in what is known as Operation Baby Lift. And sadly, the first airplane that lifted these babies, quote unquote orphans, out crashed. Some of them died during that crash, but eventually many made it to the United States. Um, uh, and were adopted into families here. But again, the issue that many critics of this policy and events, uh, criticize the U.S. in terms of trying to make ourselves look good and be the savior of poor orphans and poor Amerasian babies. We're actually taking kids away from loving families. Now, Amerasians at first were, pariah, meaning they weren't wanted by their Vietnamese family uh, in Vietnam. However, when the U.S. passed the Amerasian Act, allowing Amerasians to come to the U.S. to reunite with their American fathers who were American soldiers, and hence they have the right to be American citizens. Many of the Amerasians in Vietnam then had status, meaning, they were wanted children now because they were the ticket out of Vietnam. And so there are cases of Amerasians being paid to falsify relationships with Vietnamese who wanted to get out of Vietnam by declaring a relationship with the Amerasian kid who would eventually get to the United States.